So if you notice over on this end of the auditorium, there's eats and treats. I understand and I recognize completely that it would be impossible for you to take drinks and eat those things with a mask on. So I would encourage you to have eats and treats with you while you're watching the presentation, which will be starting in just a couple of minutes as soon as we can get everything ready to go. Was that too subtle? Let's go ahead and get started. Well, thank you all very much for being here today. If you notice, we have a vacant seat on stage. That is by plan. The Attorney General for the state of Kansas will be joining us here today, but he is not here yet. He's still at a function in Hutchinson, which he knew there was going to be some delays. So he knows we're starting without him, and he will join us when he's able. So I'll go ahead and get started with the presentations and with the ceremony, and we can hear from him when he arrives. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here today. It was fun for me walking through the lobby because some of you I have known my entire professional life. It's kind of amazing. I don't think I've gotten any older. Apparently that is not true though, but it's very nice to see old friends and colleagues from years ago, and new friends and colleagues too, not to discount them. We're here today for a very special occasion, and that's to rededicate the KLETC East Dormitory, which is adjacent to this building, but the KLETC East Dormitory as Pavey Hall. buildings don't get named every day. Certainly they don't get named every day at KLETC, just because we don't build buildings that often. It's kind of a rare thing, and we've only done that a handful of times. So to have a building at KLETC named after you is a substantial thing. As a matter of fact, if you saw out in the lobby, we have a master plan that is being planned. I'm doing that so there's a building that can be named after me sometime in the future. But as it stands right now, if I don't, we've got the garage, so it'll be the Beck garage perhaps sometime in the future. So hopefully we will continue to grow and flourish as an organization, just like we did under Ed Pavey's tenure. Again, we are celebrating two things here. We're celebrating not only the fact that Ed had such a substantial impact on law enforcement in the state of Kansas and certainly KLETC, but also to celebrate the great successes that KLETC has had over the past 24 years, 27 years now. I do want to apologize. I want to apologize to Ed, and I want to apologize to everybody in here. This is delayed, this ceremony. We wish we could have had this ceremony sooner. But unfortunately, as we all know, COVID impacted all of our lives in ways probably we don't even know. And this is one of those things. Pavey Hall was actually named nearly, gosh, a year ago now, well, over a year. And we've been sitting and waiting for when we could get together again as a group of people and come together to celebrate what a great thing it is that the regents have done by naming this building in Ed's honor. So for those of you who are not familiar with Ed's career, I'd like to start out just by giving you a brief summary of Ed's career and why it is that we're here today, what brings us here. Most of you, I think, know at least part of his career. There's different parts that you may be familiar with, but just taking it in as a whole, the 42 years that Ed spent in law enforcement and impacting law enforcement, it's impressive to listen to. Former KLETC Director Ed Pavey began his law enforcement career in 1969, the same year I began my life, with the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, where, sorry, that's an old joke that we've shared many times. We always said that Ed got his law enforcement certificate the same year that I got my birth certificate. But where he served as, he was in the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, where he served as a deputy and command staff officer for 21 years. Ed retired from the Sheriff's Office in 1989 at the rank of captain, and he was a division commander. Ed worked as an assistant director then. From that point, he comes over to KLETC as an assistant director for the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center from 1989 to 1994. And then he served as the acting director from 1994 to June of 1995, when Dr. Bob Senecal promoted him to the position of director. Ed was named as the third director of KLETC, which I think is very telling. KLETC has only had 3 directors, well, now 4 with me, but has only had 4 directors in its entire existence, which the stability that Ed provided over those years, I think is reflected in some of the achievements that we've had. During his 23 years as director, Ed oversaw the expansion of the campus from its original 2 buildings, which were inherited from a World War II era naval air base, and that the air base was previously here. So he inherited those buildings, or KLETC inherited those buildings, and Ed turned that into what you see today, which is a 15 building facility, state-of-the-art electronics training, simulators, this building, this room itself, and a driving course that's second to none, all situated on a 173-acre site. And all of that is as a result of Ed Pavey and his tenure. It is estimated that 10,000 new officers graduated from KLETC during Ed's tenure. And when you consider we only have 8,000 officers in the state, about 8,000 officers, you're talking about a generation of law enforcement went through these halls under Ed Pavey's tenure. And like I said, in total, and I said earlier, Ed served the citizens of Kansas for 42 years. I got that wrong. That'd be 49 years. And very proud today to stand up here and to recognize the career of Ed Pavey and what got him to this point today and what got the regents to recognize the successes in his career. So if we could recognize Ed for those achievements, I think it'd be appropriate to do so. I didn't think you all would believe me. If I came up here and told you all these great things about Ed, they'd say he just convinced you somehow. I don't know how he convinced you. It's probably because you worked for him that you were able to believe those things. So we went out and we recruited some other people to come up here and tell you what they think about Ed Pavey and about the fact that there's a building being named after Ed Pavey. Actually, the hard part was narrowing it down to just a reasonable number of people that we could bring up here, because there's a lot of people who would like to tell you, well, there's a lot of people who would like to tell you what they think of Ed Pavey. But there are a lot of people who would have been glad to have been here today to pile on and to tell you what great things that he accomplished. But we will start with John Carmichael, Representative John Carmichael. Let me tell you a little bit about John Carmichael before he comes up here. This is the arrest sheet. John Carmichael is the Kansas House of is the representative in the Kansas House of Representatives for District 92, which includes Riverside in Wichita and parts of Northwest Wichita. He was first elected in 2013 to complete the unexpired term of Representative Niall Dillmore. John is a lifelong Wichitan, a graduate of Wichita State University and of KU. He and his wife Cheryl have lived in the Riverside area in Wichita since the year 2000. He's practiced law here for over 30 years, served on civic boards and committees. He's taught as an adjunct faculty member at WSU, received public service awards from several organizations, including the Veterans Administration. He has served on the Governor's Committee on Kansas Libraries under Governor Finney, and is chair of the Kansas Human Rights Commission, and then where our paths crossed when he became the chair of the Kansas Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training under Governors Sebelius, Parkinson, and Brownback. As a lifelong Democrat, he has dedicated countless hours to building the party. In 2006, he established the voter protection poll monitoring system in Sedgwick County and was later asked by the Kansas Democratic Party to implement the program statewide. He concluded 2 terms as the 4th district chair of the party and was the Kansas Democratic Party state secretary. Certainly a citizen statesman. Please join me in welcoming Representative John Carmichael to give a few remarks at the podium.
Oh my, what in the world should I say after that introduction, you know? A couple of years ago, Darin told me that the university was contemplating naming a facility here after Ed. And I had an immediate suggestion of an appropriate facility that could be named for Ed. The chancellor did not accept my recommendation. But if you've ever seen John Wayne in The Green Berets, just watch the final scene of the movie and you will know what my suggestion was as to what ought to be named for Ed Pavey. But I was unsuccessful in that attempt, like many others. So instead, I'm here today to say something about my friend Ed, but probably more importantly, to try to say something about professionalism, integrity, Kansas law enforcement, what we've built here, and what the future holds. And I do see our good friend, the Attorney General. Mr. Attorney General, we have a seat of honor reserved for you here, right next to our guest of honor. Welcome. The good news for all of you is that I don't have to stall to wait for the Attorney General to get here. You know, I really was surprised, though, when both Ed and Darin asked me to come up here and say a few words, of all the people who could say a few words about Ed and KLETC and what's happened here. But, you know, my history with Director Pavey would go back to Wichita Heights High School. He graduated in 1970. He was hired by Vern Miller as a dispatcher. In fact, it may have even been described as a student job while he was in high school, if memory serves. And I showed up there couple years after he graduated, and needless to say, his reputation had preceded him. I would have never imagined that I would be here naming or helping name a facility like this for the guy that I knew of when I was in high school, but he's done well. He truly has. 19, skip forward just a little bit, mid-70s, as Darin had said, this was the Hutchinson Naval Air Station, also known as the Sunflower Glider Port. It was a favorite location where flight instructors would take junior birdmen like me and fly up here and then pull the power on the airplane and ask you where you were going to land. And the natural thing was to try to glide to the Hutchinson Municipal Airport, where if you'd only just looked down, there was a beautiful runway at the Hutchinson Naval Air Station, also known as Sunflower Glider Port. But that's the first time that I saw the white barracks that we hear described so frequently from older graduates here. Truly, people were living in the naval barracks that were left over from, frankly, World War II. Progress obviously was made when I came back here in the mid-'80s to work with Maynard Brazil on defending some lawsuits against law enforcement officers. We did have, as Darin says, 2 buildings here. And in fact, we were taking the steps to build this facility, but more importantly, respect and integrity, respect for the profession of law enforcement. This didn't happen in Kansas by happenstance. It happened because a whole lot of people, many of whom are in this room, devoted more than just their own career to the profession. They devoted their efforts, their work, to build what I think all would agree is one of the finest law enforcement training centers in the Midwest, if not the country. Take a look at what has happened here during Ed's 26 years. We have Brazil Hall, we have Welch Hall, and now we will have Pavey Hall. But all of this represents brick, stone, and mortar. It represents a home for law enforcement training in Kansas, a headquarters, if you will. You know, I probably know hundreds of people who've graduated from KLETC. In fact, right now, by my count, I believe there are 5 KLETC graduates in the Kansas legislature, or perhaps more that I haven't even thought about it at the moment. But we have gone from a state where law enforcement training was not really required prior to 1968 to a state now where we have this facility, a 21st century facility, a place where recruits as well as veteran officers can come and enjoy a good experience. Quality dormitories. You know, one of the first things Ed said to me when I met him up here 10, 15 years ago was, it's really important that we have good chow. And he's absolutely right. You got to take care of the troops. And this facility is where Kansas can be very proud that we have a 21st century facility. We have a facility where there are experienced instructors, and my hat's off to Ed on that grounds too, because Ed didn't just take care of Ed. Ed arranged for and worked to build a cadre of instructors and experienced law enforcement officers to assume the reins as he moved on to, I guess he's now working on the railroad, so to speak. And so the point, I think, of all of this is, in a world where we hear people talk about defunding the police, here is a sterling example of why we don't defund the police. Roughly $17 million in capital improvements were accomplished during Ed Pavey's tenure. All of that money, in one fashion or another, was appropriated by the Kansas legislature. It didn't happen without the help of then Senator Schmidt, Jan Pauls, Mike O'Neill. The list could go on and on. But the reason that that money was forthcoming from the legislature to fund this facility was because people respected a man named Ed Pavey when he came to Topeka. When Ed showed up, it wasn't because he was there to just shake hands and glad hands and receive a certificate and go back to Hutchinson. It was because he was there making the contacts, building the relationships, explaining to people why it was that we needed to build this facility. And today, we can all be proud of what was accomplished. So, knowing that friends from my alma mater, the University of Kansas, are here, and knowing that my good friend, the Attorney General, despite our difference in party, is here. It's all to speak well about our friend Ed Pavey, because it was through his reputation, his work, his integrity, his word as his bond, that the legislature appropriated the funds that were necessary to build this facility. The question wasn't whether, it was how much and what do you need, Ed? And his good reputation, in my judgment, is why we have what we have here today. So let's be proud of it. Let's congratulate our friend Ed. Let's make sure we put up a fine bronze plaque. But the heart of what he's accomplished here is not the brick and the mortar. It's the professionalism. It's the 8,000 law enforcement officers that he's trained. And it's the future that he has made possible for the Law Enforcement Training Center. So Ed, you have my thanks, my friend. And Darin, thank you for allowing me a few moments to talk to my friends. Thank you all.
So I left in the parts in your bio about your party affiliation, in part because I think it's important that everybody know that it's not a partisan issue here. This is not partisan. This is a recognition of the works that Ed did. It never was partisan. It was working across the aisle, truly. And I appreciate your thoughts and your efforts, as well as the efforts on the other side, so to speak, the Republican side. Absolutely. And we owe our gratitude. We're in this room today, yes, because of Ed's leadership, but also because of the legislature and their vision. Not every state has the same vision, has the same ability to look at the problems and come to the right conclusion that what we need is professionalism in law enforcement. We need facilities, we need staff. And it was because of Ed's ability to tell the story of what we need, but it was also a legislature that was willing to hear. So we appreciate your efforts, General, back when you were a legislator, and of course, John, your current efforts. Our next speaker will be the 44th Attorney General of the state of Kansas. He was elected in 2010 as the Attorney General and was reelected again then in 2014 and 2018. He's the state's second longest serving Attorney General, and in 2018 received more votes than any other candidate for Attorney General in Kansas history, which I think bringing so many people together these days in politics is an amazing thing. Under Attorney General Schmidt's leadership, the office has focused on prosecuting crimes against children, protecting senior citizens from scams and ripoffs, recovering record-setting amounts of money for Kansas consumers and taxpayers, providing professional legal services for the state of Kansas, and standing up against illegal overreach by the federal government. Attorney General Schmidt has personally and successfully argued 3 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. He has led the successful efforts to strengthen Kansas law enforcement in the areas of human trafficking, to tighten penalties for defrauding senior citizens and for stealing from taxpayers, to build a modern forensic science laboratory for the KBI, to strengthen consumer privacy laws, and to improve the investigation of crimes against children. Before being elected Attorney General, Schmidt served as a Kansas State Senator as part of the Southeast Kansas delegation as chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee and as the Senate Majority Leader, which is where he and I crossed paths for the first time, as he was the Senate Majority Leader when we were going to the legislature to ask for funding. He previously served as counsel to Kansas Governor Bill Graves and as legislative assistant to U.S. Senator Nancy Landon Kassebaum. Attorney General Schmidt is a graduate of Independence High School and studied at Independence Community College. He earned his bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Kansas, his master's degree in international politics from the University of Leicester? Close enough. In the United Kingdom, and his law degree from Georgetown University Law Center, and his doctorate in law from the University of Kansas School of Law. Please join me in welcoming Attorney General Derek Schmidt to the podium.
Well, that was really nice. It's like we wrote it ourselves. That's very pleasant. I was listening to all the very nice things that my friend Representative Carmichael was saying against our friend, or about, not against, about our friend Ed Pavey. I thought this is far too serious for the moment. I remember Ed's actual retirement. So we're not double dipping. We're going to say the nice things twice, but it was, as many of you know, his retirement was actually held not on public property, so the rules were different. And stories got better as the evening progressed. There were no arrests that I recall. And there was some reference to Gilligan's Island thing, but I'll leave that on the table. So, Ed, what a great day, and congratulations to you on this well-deserved recognition. I was trying to think back, John and Ed go back so far, and as I was thinking about that, I was trying to think the first time that I met Ed. I actually am not sure the first time I met Ed. I remember the first time I recall meeting Ed. He was coming to ask me for money in order to build nice things on this campus. And I was sufficiently naive to think it was because I was in an important position. In hindsight, it's probably because they couldn't get the appropriators to listen, so they went to the rest of us. We're trying to get us to be of assistance. But it was a great project, and obviously there'll be more to be done going forward. Maybe it was mentioned earlier. I apologize for being just a bit late, but the first project was the bricks and mortar that John talked about, but then of course Ed is especially proud of the statue, which was later placed in you call it the quad anyway, in the courtyard out here. I recall being here for that dedication and probably 25 preceding calls from Ed to make sure we had everything all worked out for it. And that's why everything went well. So, look, I just want to say this. I would second everything that Representative Carmichael just said, at least to the extent I have knowledge of it. Ed is the professional we needed to lead this organization for a period of time. He's handed it off, and he received it in good condition, and he's handed it off in good condition. And we have an unbroken series of professionals who have led this training center, not just the physical plant, but the idea of professionalism and training and standards and judgment in Kansas law enforcement since they first became the law, the modern law, about 50 years ago now. I know, we've had plenty of matters in the news around the country the last few years, and we've had occasion to talk with some of our counterparts in other states, and I know many of you have as well in the law enforcement profession. And I am continually amazed at how many states have yet to catch up with the high bar that we not only set but enforce in this state. There's always room for improvement, but my goodness, we are leaps and bounds ahead of where some of our sister states have been and still are. And that's because Kansans have demanded it and expected it over the years. And we've had professional leaders like Darin and like Ed who have made it happen. And so we may be out of buildings to name for Darin. I don't know. We'll have to check that out at some future point. And there may be a building spree yet to come. I don't know. I'm not an appropriator now either, so can't help out with that. But I will say that it's a great day to reflect on the sort of the long distance that we've come in really less than 2 generations in Kansas that are reflected in this building, in the many graduating classes of young men and women who choose to become law enforcement officers, and culminate right here in this room or in this room and the next 2, which is appropriately named Integrity, Integrity Auditorium. And none of that is by happenstance. None of it just happened. None of it happened because it was inevitable. It all happened because people along the way stood up and said, this is my watch, and on my watch, here's what we're going to do to make this profession better. And here's what we're going to do to make this campus better as a reflection of the professionalism that we expect in law enforcement ranks. And I will say it is a great crew of folks that have led this institution since it was created. And it's no aspersion on any of them to say that Ed is at the top. He is at the top in terms of the amount of ground that he got covered over the time that he served here. And Ed, we're really proud of you and appreciate very much your leadership. And we're delighted that you're going to have one of these buildings that you begged so hard for. So hard you begged. So hard. Named in your honor. It's a fitting tribute. So thanks for letting me be just a little bitty part of this today. And as long as you remain kind and you know what happened at your retirement stays at your retirement, it'll all be good. We won't reveal a thing, although I see Colonel Jones out here. So, you know, there were witnesses. There were witnesses. This is a great facility. I haven't visited by any means all of them around the country, and I suspect there are people in this room who have visited far more than I, and not just the guys that work here, but the ones I've seen, this is a gold standard. And it's because of folks like Ed Pavey stepping up and making it happen. So Ed, thank you. And congratulations on this great day. And Darin's going to lead the fundraising for your statue that we're going to put out there. And I'm leaving it at that, Darin. Thank you all very much.
So for those of you who have not looked out in the courtyard yet, you need to do that. There is a beautiful bronze statue out there that Ed led the efforts for. And of course, Dr. Senecal, sitting in the back, assisted substantially with the funding of that statue. And we always joked, Ed and I, that we didn't know who was going to pose for the statue until we saw how much money there was. If we had enough money, Ed was going to pose. If we were running a little short, I was going to pose for it. So we may have to take the same approach as we move forward in funding. Thank you for those kind remarks, though. It very much so appreciate them, and I would very much so second those thoughts. Our final speaker, who has the privilege today of representing the Chancellor of the University of Kansas, is Emily Zentner. Emily is the Interim Vice Provost for Lifelong and Professional Education, which offers non-credit education and employee training and development across the Kansas City region, the state, and actually across the world. And it's also the unit to which KLETC reports. Emily was formerly the Director of Business Services for KU Lifelong and Professional Education, overseeing financial, HR, and registration functions in the department. Her role included fund accounting, grant management, recruiting, financial reporting, compliance, and employee relations. She's been with the University of Kansas since 2008 She holds a bachelor's degree in accounting from Westminster College and a master's degree in accounting from the University of Utah. Please join me in welcoming my boss, Vice Provost Emily Zentner.
Thank you. So I'm happy to join the chorus here, Ed. So when I first joined the University of Kansas 13 years ago, I was new to Kansas and new to KU, and I had never heard of the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. I was soon introduced to Ed Pavey and began learning about the significant organization that he directed here at KLETC. Through Ed, I learned not only of the state legislative mission he was tasked with executing, but the passion and dedication that he had for the law enforcement profession, for the importance of high quality training. He knew KLETC had far-reaching impact, potentially touching every Kansas citizen in all corners of the state, and he took his responsibility seriously. Ed was an exceptional ambassador for the law enforcement profession, KLETC, and the University of Kansas. As has been remarked before, under Ed's leadership, KLETC increased its capacity to meet the demand by expanding from 2 World War II era military surplus buildings to 15 buildings that can house, feed, and train hundreds of people at any given time. He embraced modern training techniques and infrastructure such as state-of-the-art electronic training simulators and emergency vehicle operations driving course. He was a conscientious steward of resources. Despite knowing that he had received a lot of money to build these buildings, he was never frivolous with the money. He always focused on maximizing each dollar's impact to KLETC's mission. He built a culture of professionalism, integrity, and respect. And as a result, Ed's staff were proud to be part of his vision. Diligent leaders strive to leave their organizations better than they were before, and it's clear that Ed Pavey was a diligent leader. He left KLETC several years ago for a much-deserved retirement, but now his legacy will still live on, and Ed will always be a part of KLETC. It's an honor and a privilege to publicly thank Ed for his contributions to KLETC, to KU, and to the citizens of the state of Kansas. So Ed, here's to a job well done.
So the next part of this presentation is going to be a little bit different, and this is the COVID impacted part of the presentation. We ordered the bronze plaque a long time ago. I can't even tell you how long ago it was. The problem is that half of the payment was made when the plaque was ordered, and the other half was to be made when the plaque was installed. That's the way the contract was written. And so we held off installing as long as we could, but ultimately the vendor wanted paid. And so we did have to go ahead and install the plaque in the location. And unfortunately, it's not in a location that's conducive to bringing everybody there to see it be unveiled. So through the miracle of technology, we are going to step out. Ed and I are going to step out, and you're going to get to watch us unveil the plaque on video. And we will unveil the plaque and then come back in here and rejoin. So if you give us just a couple of minutes to get to the location where the plaque is, we will come back on television so that you can watch. Thanks. I believe we're live at this point. So, Ed, it is my honor and privilege to be able to recognize the naming of Pavey Hall officially with the official bronze plaque that has been undercover for over a year now, with students wondering what on earth this is hanging on the wall. And we went from paper to cloth, at least over time, because it became longer and longer. But it's my privilege to be able to reveal to everybody for the first time the bronze plaque that commemorates this as Pavey Hall. And if Ed, if you could assist me in this, actually probably literally. We'll lift that up and tuck it up there.
Wow, look at that. That's gonna hold or not there.
I don't know.
We'll
Let's
take it
just
off.
take it off. Perfect.
There.
Thank you. So the plaque says, Pavey Hall. This building is named in honor of Ed H. Pavey for his selfless, dedicated service to Kansas law enforcement as the director of Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. As the director of the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center from July 1994 to July 2018.
Wow. All I can say is thank you. That is really a beautiful plaque. I'll have some further comments inside the auditorium, but
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you. So let's return back into the stage and finish up the presentation.
Wow, that's a great likeness. Wow. Wow.
So all we had at the plaque was a camera. So there was no monitor there. So we didn't really know for sure whether anything was being streamed in here or not. But we just went ahead and proceeded as if it were streaming. So to end this presentation today, I want to talk a little bit about what it takes to get a building named after a person and why it's significant. So the process for naming a building here at KLETC is there was a nomination that came from KLETC. It went up the reporting chain to the former vice provost and then on to the provost. And then it goes to a committee to review and make sure that the person is worthy of having a building named after them. Finally, it goes to the chancellor of the University of Kansas, who holds this by policy, who holds this decision personally. He alone makes the decision as to whether or not KU is going to make the recommendation. And then finally, it goes to the Kansas Board of Regents with justification. So it goes through that entire chain. The policy is very clear as to who can have a building named after them. The naming of any state university building is the province of the Board of Regents. Generally, buildings are named for distinguished individuals who have made extraordinary contributions of a scholarly, professional, or public service, it was public safety in this case, public service nature related to the university's mission or for major donors to the construction of the building. And I can tell you, Ed Pavey did not make a major contribution financially. So we had to fit him in the other way. And certainly he fits in as a person who's made an extraordinary contribution of a public service nature. So it was my privilege to nominate Ed as having this building named after him. And I'd like to read to you as my final thoughts today, the letter that I sent up the chain and to the Board of Regents nominating Ed for this honor. Please accept this resignation. Wow. And I'd only been in the position for a year. Please accept this recommendation for redesignating the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center's East Dormitory as Pavey Hall in honor of Ed H. Pavey, KLETC Director Emeritus, continuing a long tradition of naming buildings at KLETC in honor of former deans and directors. Previously given this honor were former Dean Robert Senecal, who joins us today for the Senecal Driving Complex. I'm sorry, I'm going off script here, but we named the Senecal Driving Complex after him. Dean Robert Senecal, Dean of the KU Continuing Education, former KLETC Director Maynard Brazil, and former KLETC Director Larry Welch. Director Emeritus Pavey retired on June 17, 2018, after serving nearly 29 years at the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center, a unit of professional and continuing education. So just to know how long, I'm sorry, I'm deviating again. Just to know how long it was from the time that I wrote this letter until today, we've already renamed continuing education again. So it's no longer professional and continuing education. It's lifelong in professional education. Pavey's nearly 50 years of public service began with the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, where he worked until joining the university staff as KLETC Assistant Director December 1st, 1989, and subsequently Director on July 18th, 1994. Over his 29 years of service, Pavey left an indelible mark on the evolution of KLETC. Under his leadership, KLETC developed the first standardized curriculum for the basic training program. Pavey engaged the leading expert in the nation to conduct a job task analysis and develop learning objectives, lesson plans, and testing materials for every class offered. Also under his leadership, the training center developed into a campus, going from the original 2 buildings to 15. Nowhere was Pavey more successful than in his efforts to obtain resources for KLETC through the legislature. In six successful legislative proposals, Pavey was able to obtain the increases in funding to allow for the expansion of KLETC facilities and operations. KLETC graduates 350 to 400 officers a year in its full-time basic training programs and more than 10,000 students in its professional and continuing education programs. During his tenure, Pavey was well known not only to the students participating in the programs, but also to their chiefs, sheriffs, and directors throughout the state for his commitment to integrity. It is therefore altogether fitting and appropriate that the next generation of students would be reminded of his contribution by being assigned a dormitory room in Pavey Hall. Director Emeritus Pavey's combination of professionalism, engaging administrative style, and dedication to the highest standards ensures that his influence on Kansas law enforcement and the university will continue to be felt for many generations to come. Signed, Darin Beck, Executive Director. And with those remarks, I would like to introduce to the stage Director Emeritus Ed Pavey.
First of all, my staff used to cringe when I would say, I'm just going to make a few brief remarks because I'd be at the podium for 15 or 20 or 30 minutes. But I assure you today, I will keep the remarks brief. But first of all, Colonel Jones of the Kansas Highway Patrol, the superintendent, and Gary Steed, who just retired as the executive director of the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training. I have my phone off, so don't be calling me while I'm up here at the podium. So I'm very, very humbled to be here, and honored to receive this award. The recognition of having a building named after you was not in my wildest dreams that would actually happen, but my family and I sure appreciate it, and we will cherish that naming for generations to come. When the chancellor called me to notify me that the Board of Regents had approved this, I wasn't even aware that a naming request had been submitted by Executive Director Beck. So I was kind of at a loss of words. I had a couple of grandsons with me, and I was at the parking lot of a grocery store just getting out of the car when my cell phone rang, and it was the chancellor, and he was alerting me to the fact that the Board of Regents had approved it. So I was, again, at a loss of words, and I just thanked him for the phone call and shared with him that I do my best to always maintain the highest standards of conduct and professionalism, and that I was extremely proud that the university had approved the request. But there's a lot of folks to thank, and I'm going to start by thanking everyone that's here today that drove many miles, some of you, to come here to share this day with me and my family. So thank you for those that are online watching it via the internet. Sincere, heartfelt thank you to Executive Director Beck for making the initial request. And a sincere thank you to the Chancellor of the University and the Provost and the Kansas Board of Regents for this honor. I want to say thank you to General Schmidt for being here today, and Representative Carmichael. Kansas has staunch supporters in these two gentlemen on public safety. There doesn't go a day go by that they aren't promoting law enforcement and standing there covering the backs of the Kansas law enforcement community, and we're indebted to you two gentlemen for that. I wasn't sure about Representative Carmichael in his teenage days. Gary Steed, who was an adjacent beat officer along with me up in the north end of Wichita, would chase Representative Carmichael down and have to have a little talk about his driving habits coming out of Heights High School. But I appreciate you two gentlemen taking time out of your schedules to be here today. In a recent video clip that Courtney Marshall had done from Wichita State with an individual by the name of Larry Hatterberg, many of you may have known or heard of Larry. He was a photojournalist for KAKE in Wichita. He mentioned in a video clip about my career back in April that it was a long train running with several whistle stops. And that same analogy about a long train running can be said about the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. For those of you here today that are online that don't know the basic history of KLETC, we were created by the legislature in 1968 to serve as a central headquarters for all police training in this state. And at that time, they needed a location to build this training center or to find some buildings that were already up and running. And people ask why KLETC is 180 miles away from Lawrence, from the campus. It's because at the time they were looking for a facility. This was a place that had a cafeteria, some dormitory space and shower space, and some office and classroom space that could be up and running with some renovation and minimal expense to the state. So that's why KLETC, a part of the University of Kansas, is 180 miles away from what we call the mothership. So, but there was a lot of dedicated staff members over the years, and the first director here, again, and you've heard his name, Maynard Brazil. Want to acknowledge him and his dedicated staff because they had a vision for KLETC, and they carried that vision along for 20 years. And Maynard unfortunately passed away at age 92 here back in January of 2017. But it was through his vision and his staff's hard work that KLETC got started. And I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Robert J. Cynical. Bob, would you please stand for just a minute, please? Yes, please. Thank you. I'm the boss at the podium. Bob Cynical had something in common with all three directors at KLETC in the first years of our existence. Maynard Brazil, Larry Welch, and Ed Pavey. Bob Cynical was our boss. Dr. Cynical was Dean of Continuing Education at KU Lawrence campus and also Associate Vice Chancellor. And he put his trust and faith into all of us as directors to do our jobs. And we never let him down. The first class held here at KLETC was in 1969 just prior to that, they held him in a hotel in Hutchinson while they were trying to get this site ready. Then in 1989, a new director, the legendary Larry Welch, came along. Larry retired from the FBI out of Wichita, came on board here as an associate director in 1986. Dr. Senecal hired him. And 3 years later, in 1989, Maynard Brazil retired and Larry became the director of the KBI. And that's when I came to work for Larry as his assistant director after I retired from Sedgwick County. The one thing about Larry was he trusted his staff to do the right thing and put us all to work. And I thought I would be there here at KLETC as an assistant director for the rest of my life career. But a short time later, in 1994, the Attorney General at the time, Bob Steffen, asked Larry to serve as the director of the KBI, and Larry left and went on to something that was a childhood dream for Larry, to be the director of the KBI, and he accepted the Attorney General's invitation and left, and that's when I received the appointment as the acting director for the first year, and in 1995 became the permanent director. Lanny Welch, Lanny, please stand, would you? The Welch family is represented today by Lanny. Lanny's an assistant U.S. attorney in Wichita, and Lanny, your dad was a mentor to many of us in this room, both in the law enforcement administrators and the staff here at the training center. So thank you for sharing him with us all those years. I got to tell this story. I told it back in April, but when I received the appointment as the director, full-time director in 1995, I met with Dr. Senecal at the University of Kansas at Lawrence campus, and he took me in to see the provost, David Schulenberger. And the provost had the final say on it after the search committee had made the recommendation to Dr. Senecal. The provost said, Mr. Pavey, this director's appointment is going to be contingent upon one thing. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, there won't be any of that Wichita State WUSHOC stuff on the wall down here. And I said, yes, sir. But Dr. Senecal, I want you to know it wasn't on my office walls, but WUSHOC hung on the bathroom wall. So I want to thank and remember all those individuals along the way that have made and continue to make KLETC what it is today, a nationally recognized and an internationally recognized law enforcement training facility. We've trained Russian police officers here from St. Petersburg, Russia, the Leningrad region, and we've done some training with Armenia's state police here at KLETC. Next on my list is the great bosses that I had while I was here at KLETC. And again, those bosses were all at the mothership, either at Lawrence or at Edwards campus in Overland Park. And they include Dr. Senecal, Joanne Smith, Fred Pollocky, who I've got a text from just as I arrived here today, and he could not be with us, Sharon Graham, Dr. Dave Cook, and Emily. I'm sorry I didn't get to work directly for you, but I understand you're a great boss too, so thank you. I want to recognize and thank members of the Kansas Legislature, Representative Carmichael and the Attorney General. When I did first meet the Attorney General as the Senate Majority Leader, I had a scheduled meeting with him to talk about building these buildings and getting the funding that we needed, and he was late. And so we had our meeting in the hallway as we were walking through the Capitol building to his next meeting. And as I was trying to explain that the officers living in our dormitories were subjected to conditions that inmates in El Dorado didn't have to be, the space confinements and the old facilities and everything. And I can remember this very clearly, General. You said, Ed, I'm convinced you need the facilities. Tell me how much. And I said, sir, we need $16.4 million. And you said, that's what I needed to know. And it was a short meeting. So, and then later on, and as we moved through the years, got the buildings built, we needed to go back in 2016 for additional funding to operate the facility without laying off staff. It went through the Senate, went over to the House. The House members were wanting to send a message back to the Senate about a whole matter that did have nothing to do with us, but it was a political fight back and forth Representative Carmichael, on the night of the vote in the Kansas House, got up and made a passionate speech to all of his fellow colleagues, and that passed unanimously. Well, almost unanimously. There's still a few representatives sending messages back to the Senate, but thank you, John. All right, that's his version. I want to thank the supportive law enforcement community, officers, deputies, troopers. It didn't matter what type of uniform they wore always behind KLETC, and I appreciate that. The professional law enforcement associations, the Kansas Peace Officers, Kansas Sheriffs, Kansas Association Chiefs of Police, every one of them were always there standing with us when we testified to the legislature. I want to thank all the KLETC staff, Darin, your staff that put this together, the staff that's working here today to educate our young officers. And I say young, some are not so young anymore. But I want to thank all my staff during my 28 and a half years here that worked with me and alongside me to make this place what it is today. They always gave 110% effort, and I couldn't be more proud of their role in making KLETC what it is today. Would all the present and past and retired KLETC staff that's in the audience please stand and be recognized? Come on, boys, Dan, all of them. Thank you for being here. Dan Lair and Boyce Moses had the pleasure and honor of working for all three directors. So, gentlemen, you've carried the water too. So thank you very much. And last, I want to thank, I don't think Barbara Scott made it here. She was my executive assistant for the first 7 years. But Lisa Webster, it was my executive assistant for the last 17 years. Lisa, would you please stand, be recognized? Thank you. And last but not least, my wife of 45 years, Dana, and my 3 daughters are here today, and a son-in-law and several grandchildren. Thank you for your support over the years. And my brother and my sister-in-law join us today too. I had to pay them all, but they're here. They're here. I stand before you very humbled and honored for this building naming recognition, but please know that KLETC is what it is today because of a truly team effort over many, many years with a lot of team members. Some are still with us and some have passed on into the sunset. We remember Directors Brazil and Welch and their respective staff for their vision, their dedication, and their commitment to the Kansas law enforcement community. And to those staff members that I had the privilege, the honor to work with, and those that are working here today, thank you for always carrying and waving the KLETC flag. Your work's critical to providing our communities with well-trained, professional law enforcement officers. And I close today with one last food for thought, and I'm going to clear up any rumors or statements that were made by the Attorney General or by Representative Carmichael, that this campus is now in the capable hands of Executive Director Darin Beck, and he's announced a very aggressive campus expansion plan that will take KLETC into the future and beyond and enhance the ability to train Kansas law enforcement. But Darin, if additional buildings aren't built, let's say they don't get funded in the future, the only building naming possibility for your retirement will be Beck's Privy. Thank you. It's been an honor.
So I wanted to clear up a couple of things. No, I did want to say, you notice around the room that we have kind of a thin showing of current KLETC employees. That's because the mission continues. Training is going on even as we speak, and we now operate 5 basic training classes simultaneously. So we've got instructors and staff scattered all over the campus. And Ron Gould sends his regards. He's representing me at the sheriff's regional meeting, and so he couldn't be here, but he wanted to be here very much. And Al Sowers also. Al Sowers he's teaching up in Northeast Kansas. He's teaching an instructor development class this week, so he also could not be here. So many KLETC staff send good wishes, just couldn't be here because, as you mentioned, what we do matters, what we do is critical, and the mission goes on. So I have to encourage you to go through and get some eats and treats, as I always do. Remember that we had to scrounge money to find or to be able to buy these eats and treats, and we want to make sure that they don't go to waste. I would also encourage everybody here to go and see the plaque. It is a fitting tribute to Ed, and I do absolutely believe that it's altogether fitting and appropriate that the students that go by, and we'll see that every day as they're going into their dorm rooms in Pavey Hall, will be able to see not only those words, but also Ed's picture on the plaque. I would also encourage you all, if you have time, go out to the courtyard and see the statue that was made possible by Dr. Senecal and his wife, Evelyn, and also was a project that was of great importance to Ed. And finally, I have to say to those of you who attended virtually, thank you. I think there are people who attended virtually. I don't really know, but I'm assuming that we had a large number attending virtually. This also will be available on YouTube. So if you wanted to go back in, and Ed, I'm sure you'll want to go back in and get a copy of it for your records. But with that, thank you all very much for coming. I know that your presence meant a lot to Ed. It means a lot to KLETC as well. So thank you very much.